the birth of the bodhisattva, his mother died and was reborn in the Tusita heaven. And according to the commentary, the reason why the bodhisattva's mother passes away right after he's born is after the bodhisattva has sort of used her womb as the place of gestation. Her womb cannot be used again by anybody else. In other words, she can never give birth again to another child. And so it seems to be, maybe according to Buddhist tradition, a fixed law that whenever any Buddha is born, his mother will pass away within 7 days after his birth. And yet she's a woman of great merit. She, according to the tradition, she had made many, many past lives. Under another Buddha, she had made the vow to become the mother of a bodhisattva or the mother of a Buddha. And so she would have had great merits. And then she passed away and she was reborn in the Tusita heaven. And then there's a fixed tradition within the Pali commentaries. I think it's preserved within all of the Buddhist traditions, all the early schools in one form or another, that after the Buddha achieved Buddhahood, in order to repay the kindness of his mother, he spent one rains retreat. That's the 3-month period when it rains in northern India, usually from sometime in July to sometime in October. So he spent that period in the Tusita heaven. Or actually, according to tradition, actually, he went to the Tavatingsa heaven for the sake of his mother, and his mother came to the Tavatingsa heaven, and deities came from all of the other heavenly realms and from many world systems in order to hear the Buddha teach. And according to the Theravada tradition, what did the Buddha teach when he went to the heavenly realm to instruct his mother out of gratitude for her kindness? What did he teach? Right, the Abhidhamma. Because it's said that the Buddha has to teach the Abhidhamma in 3 months in one sitting. Everybody's sitting continuously for 3 months. And in the human realm, it can't be done. It takes much longer to explain the Abhidhamma, even though I'm almost doing it. And 2 years ago, I did it in 3 days, covered 2 chapters. This past year, 5 days, covered 4 chapters. But to explain the whole Abhidhamma system with all its complexities and elaborations, it said we have to teach continuously for 3 months. Use the microphone.
Regarding the death of the mother, after 1 week after Buddha's birth, that used to trouble me to some extent.
Yeah.
Then I saw somewhere that actually the confinement, the birth of the Buddha happened 10 months before she was destined to die. In other words, her karmic energy was exhausted, and it is only at that time. It's not that the birth of the Buddha killed the mother.
No.
Exactly.
That's not said to be the
sometimes
case.
People, I used to feel, how can such a noble person be born and the mother dies?
No. It's said to be like a fixed principle that after a bodhisattva is born in his last existence, then the mother passes away. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, continuing. Okay, now we're on paragraph 14. It said that other women give birth after carrying the child in the womb for 9 or 10 months, but the bodhisattva's mother gave birth to him after carrying him in her womb for exactly 10 months. I don't really know the reason for this. Maybe it takes somewhat longer time than for an ordinary person for a bodhisattva's body to fully develop. Okay, then continuing, it said that other women usually give birth seated or lying down, probably in most cases lying down. Not so the bodhisattva's mother. She gave birth to him standing up. And does anybody know where she gave birth to him? What is the name of the garden? Oh, you have to know that. Very famous. Still exists today. What? Say it? Right, Lumbini. It's now over the border, the Indian border in Nepal. Just a short way over the border. But in those days, it used to be a real pain in the neck to get a visa to cross the border. Maybe they've eased it up. And there's a pillar there which was set up by the King Ashoka, the Indian King Ashoka, who was the devoted Buddhist, and he traveled to most of the sacred places of Buddhism, and he erected a pillar which still has engraved in stone, I guess in Brahmi letters, the inscription, here the sage here Shakyamuni, the sage of the Sakyans, was born. And if you go to Lumbini, you could see that pillar. No, you see, in the Tusita heaven is not occupied exclusively by bodhisattvas. But she would have been on her way to enlightenment in some form. Yeah, but I think the Tusita heaven is probably divided up into different areas. Maybe she was in the circle around Maitreya Bodhisattva? I don't know, actually. It would seem a little bit weird that if she gives birth to Gautama Buddha, that she would leave the human realm and then connect herself to Maitreya. Why choose somebody who's, a few steps behind her own son? Somebody else was going to say something? Okay, let us continue then. Oh yeah, so she gives birth standing up in the Lumbini garden, and according to other texts, when she gives birth, how she could do it standing up, because it must be very stressful on the body of a woman. She holds on to the branch of a tree, and then the branch of the tree supports her, and then the infant comes out from her womb. Okay, then continuing, it said, when the bodhisattva came forth from his mother's womb, first devas received him, then human beings. So I guess because when the bodhisattva comes out, he's so, pure and radiant, and the deities are going to pay homage to him and reverence to him first. And so the deities receive him. And in this standard picture that one sees in Buddhist temples, the mother is holding on, this is Mahamaya, she is holding on to the branch of a tree. The infant has already come out, and the deities are holding him up. There's nothing about an immaculate conception here. Yeah, but it's never said that this is a case of immaculate conception. And, well, according, this isn't in the suttas, but I think this comes in maybe in the traditional stories, that she had never been able to conceive before, that, so she wasn't a virgin. And in fact, actually, the Immaculate Conception has a different meaning. It doesn't mean that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was a virgin, but what it means in Catholic theology is that all other human beings are supposed to have been reborn with original sin sort of imprinted on their souls, but Mary is the one human being who is born without that stamp of original sin in her soul, because she is the one who's sort of predestined to give birth to Jesus. Yeah, this is actually it's an interesting point in that this is the way it's come down in the Gospels. But you see, at the time the Gospels were composed, the Jewish sources, the Old Testament, had been studied and preserved, and studied not in the Hebrew, the original Hebrew, but in the Greek translation of the Old Testament or the scriptures of Judaism. Now, in Hebrew and in the section of the Old Testament on the prophet Isaiah, it said the prophecy is that the Messiah or the Savior will come forth from a young girl. A young girl will give birth. A young woman will give birth. Now the word in Hebrew, which means young girl, when the Jewish scriptures were translated into Greek, the word that means young girl was translated by the word which means virgin. And so in the Greek translation of the prophet Isaiah, it said that the Savior will come forth from a virgin. And then one finds the statement of the virgin birth, if I remember. I'm not sure if it's in Matthew. It's not in Mark. I don't think it's in John. Oh, you, but it's in Luke, certainly in Luke. Richard, do you? Wait, take the microphone.
The doctrine of the virgin birth and of the Immaculate Conception are doctrines.
Oh yeah.
Right, and the doctrines of the miracles and so on become more and more pronounced as you go, as the dating gets later. That is, the Gospels are written in sequence.
Yeah.
The later ones are the ones with the more miraculous conceptions. And I think
that I'm not so sure about, because well, this isn't the class in the New Testament, but of the four Gospels, the one that's generally regarded as the oldest is Mark.
Yeah.
No.
Uh-huh.
In the arrangement that comes in the New Testament, Matthew comes first because it seems to have been the most popular. But according to biblical scholars, Mark is regarded as the oldest.
Well, Yeah, the thing that I wanted to say is that I think the significant issue is that they're dealing with the same theological problem. That is, it's not that there are identical doctrines. It's that there are the same pressures on the formulation of theology after the fact, so that the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception is dealing with, is the Christian way of coping with the same problem that's here, because they're saying, what is it, it's then in paragraph 9, when the Bodhisattva descended into his mother's womb, she became intrinsically virtuous, refraining from killing, etc. The reason for that in Christian theology is stated. That is that Mary had to be entirely pure and relieved of original sin, because Jesus, as a good son, was required to obey every one of her commands, and she was in charge of him, and so none of her commands could command him to do something imperfect. So she had to be perfect. That's the problem. That is the way the theology develops to solve that problem in both cases. It's a logical implication that is hammering on the heads of the theologists, and so they have to deal with it somehow. And that's also, it's one of the things that indicates that, this is a later text, because it's finding a way to cope with that problem, which presumably had been the subject of a lot of questions from monks and probably also people outside. Well, how could an imperfect mother, have a perfect son?
That I've never heard before. I don't want to.
Oh well, anyway, that's the Catholic doctrine. And then I'm saying it's obviously the same issue.
The Immaculate Conception is the Catholic doctrine, but is it part of Catholic doctrine that the reason for the Immaculate Conception is because she has to be a perfect mother in order to give perfect...
That's right. Well, that's what I've been told by ministers and priests,
Okay. I don't know Catholic doctrine, so I...
Well, there's a...
I have enough dealing with Buddhist doctrine.
Right! There's a related question. What puzzles me is, what is the relationship between a Buddha being a bodhisattva being born into the reincarnation in which you'll become a Buddha, and a non-returner being born into the incarnation in which you'll be an arahant?
Okay, the bodhisattva, to become a Buddha, has to be born into the human world, and he has to be born of a mother, through a regular human birth.
Yeah.
Whereas a human being becomes an anagami, so they're not going to come back into the human world. They're going to have to be reborn usually into the form realm, particularly into the heavens, which are called the pure abodes. And when they're born in the pure abodes, then they are of what's called spontaneous birth. That is not born of parents, but you pass away from the human realm and then just spontaneously re-arise in...
Oh, but wait a minute. I'm talking about the birth of someone who's being born to be a non-returner.
Oh, to become a non-returner.
Right, yeah. I want to know, what's the difference of that? Because that birth would seem to have the same requirements that here are being attributed to the birth of a bodhisattva is about to become a Buddha. But what is the difference between an arahant and a tathagata, right?
Yeah. Anyway, let's get on to maybe we could save this for the discussion period.
Okay.
Because I want to continue onto the track of... The one thing that struck me during the discussion, I'm not sure whether, even though the Buddhist tradition doesn't depict Mahamaya as having been a virgin at the time that she conceived Siddhartha, the future Buddha, but I don't know that it depicts the conception as taking place as a result of sexual intercourse. It seems from the way it's depicted, it's just as if when the time is ripe, the bodhisattva passes away and then just takes conception in the mother's womb. But it could be that, of course, conception doesn't take place immediately after sexual relations, but the egg is fertilized and then there's some time before it becomes viable. So it might be that the bodhisattva descends and enters the mother's womb only when the egg becomes viable. Somebody can correct me if my physiology is incorrect. But let us continue so that we can finish the sutta. Of course, we're coming to the really interesting passage. Okay, the gods receive him. When the bodhisattva comes forth from the mother's womb, he did not touch the earth, not immediately, but the 4 young gods received him. Presumably those are the chief deities of the heaven of the 4 great kings. And then they set him before his mother, saying, "Rejoice, O queen, a son of great power has been born to you." Okay, then when he comes out from the mother's womb, he's unsullied by any of the fluids of the body, the humours, blood, or any kind of impurity. He comes out clean and unsullied. Maybe here you could see the Indian and specifically Buddhist idea that the body is inherently impure, and so we don't want to have, even though the bodhisattva has to be reborn from the mother's womb, but we don't want him to be sullied or the body to be covered by any of the bodily fluids. In some of the later Buddhist traditions, like this would be the tradition of centered around the figure of Padmasambhava, who is the man who brought Buddhism from India, at least one of the chief figures who brought Buddhism from India to Tibet. His very name, Padmasambhava, means born of a lotus, lotus born. So the conception, or the concept here, the idea is that he is so holy that he can't be reborn even from the mother's womb, but he just appears spontaneously. There's supposed to be a lake someplace up in Odhyana, which is in the north, far in the northwest. Now I think it's in Pakistan, that region. And a lotus appears there, and then at a certain point the lotus opens up, and lo and behold, there's a little child sitting there, cross-legged in the meditation posture, and that grows up to become Padmasambhava. Okay, then when he's comes out from the mother's womb, then 2 jets of water appear from the sky, one cool and one warm, for bathing the bodhisattva and his mother. Okay, next, this is where we come to the really wonderful and marvelous quality. Okay, Nanda says, "I heard and learned this from the Blessed One's lips. As soon as the bodhisattva was born, he stood firmly with his feet on the ground. Then he took 7 steps facing north, and with a white parasol held over him," there would be a deity here holding the white parasol, "he surveyed the four quarters, the four directions, and then he utters this, it's called the words of the leader of the herd. The leader of the herd is the chief bull in the herd. So this is like a powerful proclamation. So he says, I am the highest in the world. I am the best in the world. I am the foremost in the world. This is my last birth. Now for me there is no renewal of existence. So we see pictures of this quite common in the Buddhist temples. And even here on the Buddha's birthday, we have the image is depicted in the fountain. Each fountain has a little Buddha image with the Buddha looks like a baby wrapped in a baby's, what do you call it? Swaddling cloth, but still with features that are recognizable as those of a Buddha. And one hand is pointing up, the other hand is pointing down. Because I think the way the text comes down in the Chinese tradition is in the heavens above and in the earth below, I alone am the exalted one or the foremost one. And to us, maybe it sounds somewhat boastful to be saying, I am the foremost in the world, I am the best in the world. But I think we could see that this is like the Buddha, the way the Buddhist tradition conceives the Buddha. And so they would be ascribing these words to him. Or maybe the Buddha himself can utter them because from his perspective, it's an objective truth. It's not, the proclamation is not made out of pride, conceit, or arrogance. Okay, then the commentary gives a sort of symbolic explanation to the different features of the scene. We could look at the note here. That's 1165. I'm not sure that the commentary doesn't take this scene to be literal, but it also sees symbolic meanings in each aspect. So it said, this is on page 1337, that when he stands with his feet firmly on the ground, this is a foretoken of his attaining the four bases of spiritual power. This is because the word feet in Pali is pada, and the term for the bases of spiritual power is iddhipada, which is literally the feet of psychic power. Okay, when he's facing the north, now the word for north in Pali is uttara, which means, another meaning of uttara is superior, because the north is upwards. So uttara can be either north or superior. So the symbolic significance of this is that he has gone above and beyond the multitude of ordinary people. Okay, when he takes 7 steps, that represents his acquiring the 7 factors of enlightenment. The white parasol, and white is sort of the color of purity, signifies his acquiring the parasol of liberation. Then surveying the 4 quarters, 4 directions, you're looking everywhere. So that is supposed to signify his acquiring what's called the unobstructed knowledge of omniscience. And then when he utters that proclamation, that is a foretoken of his setting in motion the wheel of Dharma after he achieves enlightenment. And then when he says, this is my last birth, that is a foretoken of his passing passing away into final nirvana. Okay, then we come to the last of the marvelous qualities mentioned by Ananda, that when the bodhisattva came forth from his mother's womb, again a great immeasurable light, surpassing the splendor of the gods, appeared in the world. And again, the beings in the dark abysmal spaces between the galaxies are able to see each other and to recognize other beings are here. And again, the world system shakes, quakes, and trembles. Okay, so when we look at all of this, all of these wonderful and marvelous qualities, this is where I say there's a certain problem with this sutta. All of this seems to be like so, if we ended there, we could say, okay, this must be a later text that sort of represents the Buddhist community can't accept the fact that the Buddha was a human being. How does Walpola Rahula puts it? A human being pure and simple? Yes. He did not claim to be other than a human being pure and simple. So we can't accept that. We have to have him with full consciousness, first living his past life in a Deva world, passing away from the Deva world with a great flood of light appearing at the time, with all sorts of marvels accompanying the period of his mother's pregnancy, deities receiving him when he comes out from the womb, taking 7 steps and making a proclamation, and great light suffusing the whole universe. So it seems like you could say, okay, the early Buddhist monks got carried away with the fervor of their emotional devotion and had to sort of embellish the birth of somebody who was a human being, pure and simple. And so one would be tempted to say, this is all a later development, which could easily have been just slipped into the Majjhima Nikaya. But then we come to this paragraph here, number 22, which seems to be like the Buddha almost issuing a rejoinder, a response to this fervent devotion, which is sort of focused upon miraculous and wondrous events. So the Buddha says, that being so, Ananda, remember this too as a wonderful and marvelous quality of the Tathagata. That is, for the Tathagata, feelings are known as they arise, as they remain present, as they pass away. Perceptions are known as they arise, as they remain present, as they pass away. And thoughts are known as they arise, as they are present, as they pass away. And then to put extra emphasis on this, the Buddha repeats his instruction to Ananda, and he says, remember this too as a wonderful and marvelous quality of the Tathagata. And then Ananda repeats it. And so it seems here that the Buddha is almost sort of sweeping away all of these miraculous, or at least diminishing the importance of all of these wonderful and miraculous events surrounding his conception and birth, and saying that the true wonder and marvel is that through developing my mind, I'm able to be aware of feelings, perceptions, and thoughts as they arise, as they are present, and as they pass away. And this is not said to be a special, unique quality only of the Buddha, but it's also said to be a quality of somebody who is in training, of the monks in training. For example, let's say Sutta Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Fours, I think it's Sutta number 41, or it could be 51, 41 or 51. It's on 4 kinds of concentration. And one of those 4 kinds of concentration is called the concentration that leads to mindfulness and clear comprehension. And it's explained that a monk is aware of feelings, perceptions, thoughts as they arise, as they remain present, as they pass away. And then I believe there's also a passage in the Samyutta Nikaya, it might be in chapter 36, where the Buddha is telling monks who are sick that they should be mindful and clearly comprehending. Then he raises the question, what is mindfulness? And he explains it by way of the standard formula for the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Then he says, what is sampajanya, clear comprehension? Or how does a monk have clear comprehension? He is fully aware of feelings, perceptions, thoughts as they arise, as they remain present, as they pass away. Okay, and now that takes us to the end of the sutta. And if anybody has a quick question or comment, we could take it now. Otherwise, we could come back for the discussion at 12:30. What is funny? Yeah.
It's interesting that the Buddha concludes with the general characteristics of impermanence, but not of suffering and non-self. Just an observation.
Well, I think the point here is not to bring in the 3 characteristics, but just to show that he's aware of these 3 aspects of experience and each of their stages. Oh, yes, please. Please take, there's another microphone here.
Just a quick comment. I was reading, there's a phrase in I Ching. It's also a very ancient Chinese.
Yeah.
So it mentioned about for a human to be formed. For a human to be formed, there has to be yin-yang 之气. So the original says, 故人之生也, 必合阴阳之气, 故父母之精, 两精相搏, 形成乃成. And there's more. So I think my understanding is that there has to be those 2 elements.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that has some reference to how Buddha or Jesus were born.
The 2 elements would be the male and the female?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You know, I should say, I mean, again, coming back to the Bible, the idea of the virgin birth of Jesus, again, it comes through this translation of the Hebrew word meaning young woman into Greek as virgin, and then it gets inserted into certain of the Gospels in order to connect the birth of Jesus with the prophecy of the prophet Isaiah. But as far as Mary being a virgin, I'm afraid that there are some passages in the Gospels which speak about the brother of James, the brother of Jesus. So Mary had other children after Jesus. Yeah, I mean, it's a fact. Okay, so let us end now with the sharing of the merits. Then we can come back, we'll say 12:30 for some discussion. And then next week, the class next week, even though I didn't put it on the original list, but I think it would be interesting to look at Sutta number 124, which focuses upon a monk, one of the disciples of the Buddha. His name is Bhakkula. And if you want to know who Bhakkula is, when you're going up, you know what is called the Bodhi path? That is the path going up to the big hall, the main hall. There are stone images of 18 arahants along the way. If you're facing the big hall going up, then on the left you'll see one statue of a monk with a little beard, and next to him is an animal that looks something like a leopard, fierce-looking animal like a leopard. So that is Bhakkula. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits with the devas, including those in the Tusita Deva world. The nagas or dragon spirits, the bhutas or the fair spirits, and with all beings. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagupadaya avichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupiya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutiṃ.